Hi guys, I'm here today to do another hauled, read, reviewed. I've got 4 books to talk to you about today, so I can't babble on too much like I usually do. So I've got 2 books that I thought were okay and then 2 books I really enjoyed. So I'm going to work my way up to greatness. So the first one I want to talk about, and the one that I didn't enjoy, is The Trick to Time by Kit Dewell. Now I was really sad about this because I loved My Name is Leon, which was her first novel, and I was hoping to enjoy this too. Now I didn't think I'd love this one as much because My Name is Leon is about a child narrator. This is about an older lady, and I really enjoy books written from a child's perspective. I don't necessarily have a great pull to books written from older characters' perspectives, and therefore don't tend to read them that often. Now the premise of this book is that we are in the present day with a lady who's in her 60s called Mona, and she lives in Birmingham, and she is living alone, and she is running a toy shop where she crafts sort of really amazing high quality dolls which she sells all over the world. And the novel opens with her seeing a man of a similar age to her move into a flat across the street, and she can see him from the window, and they begin this sort of courtship, let's call it. Tied in with her story, she also goes to a man who lives locally, who's a very mysterious recluse, and he is the man who sands the woods into the dolls' sort of shapes for her. And there's something of a tension between the two. So in one half of this novel there's this courtship building with this new gentleman, and in the other half of the novel there's this sense of unease with this other man. And then the novel starts to go back in time to when Mona was a very young girl and when she first came over from Ireland to Birmingham, and you find out about her life. Now I don't really want to give much more away than that. What I'm going to say is this is a nice novel. When I was reading it, it was nice to turn the page. It's one of those books that whilst reading it, it was fine, but as soon as I put it down I didn't feel any inclination to pick it up, to find out what was going to happen in the next chapter. I just wasn't really that bothered. I didn't really feel that connected to the story. So for the first half that's how I felt. And then as we start going into Mona's history and learning more about man she loved many years before, and their relationship and what happened to that relationship, I felt that the book started to lose itself a bit. So I already wasn't massively engaged, but I didn't like the way the past storyline went. And as soon as we were given the tiniest bit of a clue as to where the story might be going, I just thought, please don't go down that route, and then it did. So I found this story a bit forgettable, but then also quite predictable, and those two things pulled together aren't great. So I don't think this is an awful book by any means. I just think it's a bit of one of those books where you're just like, that was okay and a bit predictable, you know. So yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this. You know, there's people who may enjoy this a lot more than me, but I didn't really think this was anything particularly exciting or special, which was a real shame after her first book. So there's that one. Then we have The Wicked Comet by Laura Carlin. Now this is a debut novel, and lots of people have been drawn to this because it has got a very beautifully designed cover, and it's a naked hardback, which I think many of us love. So I read this quite soon after reading The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower, and I was worried that it would be too soon after reading that one because they're set in quite similar historical periods. I think this one's set a little bit after. Yes, 1831 this is set, and this is set in London too, so I was a bit concerned. No need to be concerned, they're entirely different novels. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock has quite a fun, upbeat feel to it. It's quite focused on telling you about beautiful people and beautiful things. This is not. This says a novel of darkest London, and that is really what it is. This novel opens with a young character whose name I have forgotten, which is never a good sign, called Hester White. Hester White is quite a young character, and I think she's nearly 20 maybe, and she lives with a very poor family in the slums of London, and there's some sort of sense of criminality to her family and her neighbours and the people she rubs shoulders with. she's been hoping to try and get herself out of this family because she has a cousin who she's trying to meet, who she's hoping can get her, lift her out of this society. So her parents died several years before and they were a bit more wealthy, and then her parents, groundkeeper and I think housemaid, are the people who are now raising her. So she's sort of come from much more than the situation she's currently in. Very early on in this novel, she gets knocked over by a carriage in the street, and the gentleman who knocks her over decides to take him to his house in what was then the countryside but is probably now another part of London, to help her recuperate, and a mystery sort of starts to build from there. Now, the mystery of this novel comes in very, very quickly, in that people are disappearing, her cousin who was supposed to meet her being one of those people. And so Hester gets very interested in where all these people are going, if it's just people deciding to leave and not letting people know, or if there's something darker afoot. So that's one part of the novel, and another part of the novel is when she goes to this country house, she meets a older woman there who agrees to try and educate her as sort of a test to see whether people from working class backgrounds can be educated, and obviously they don't know that actually she comes from a educated family before her parents' death. So there's not much more I really want to tell you about the plot. What I will say is this is a novel of two themes. One of those themes is the relationship she builds with this woman and the discovery of this other world which she was once part of and has now been pulled away from, the descriptions of London, the feeling of this country manor. So that's one half of the novel, which I really enjoyed. I found it really atmospheric, it was more gothically written than I expected, and I thought that was all great. And then the other half of the novel, which is the mystery, I didn't enjoy as much. So I felt like the mystery was going to go one way and I was quite enjoying guessing and being kept waiting, and then I felt like it let the mystery take over, and we started to lose the characterisation that was being built, the relationship that was being built between these two women, and I felt like it allowed some of the tension to drop. So I really enjoyed this novel. I think for a debut it was a fun, enjoyable book, but I felt in the first half that it was going to be more than it became for me, which is always a shame. So I'd recommend this. I don't think this is an amazing historical fiction, but I do think she's an author to watch, and I'll be intrigued to see what she brings out next. The next book I'm going to talk about is Tangerine by Christine Mangan. If you haven't heard anyone talk about this, this is set in 1950s and it's mainly set in Tangier in Morocco, and it focuses around two female characters called Alice and Lucy. Now we have alternating chapters, both in first person perspective, and the premise of this novel is that Alice has recently moved to Tangier with her new husband. She's in her early 20s and she doesn't like her new home, she doesn't have a great relationship with her husband, and she's just living this very close, claustrophobic life, mainly in the apartment in Tangier. She doesn't really leave. And she references back to an incident that happened about a year ago, and it was an awful incident, and her memories of it are a bit cloudy, and another woman called Lucy was involved, and she hasn't seen Lucy since the incident. And then in Lucy's first chapter she turns up in Tangier to see Alice and acts like the incident never happened. And the novel goes from there. I really loved the first half of this novel, so I think this is a really good novel. I really enjoyed it, and I think for a first novel it's a real accomplishment, and I will be reading more. Now, if you go into this book thinking it's a thriller, like an out and out thriller, that isn't what it is, and I wouldn't have read it if it had been, because I don't enjoy out and out thrillers. This is a slow paced psychological study of two characters. It's a book that makes you feel uneasy, it's quite taut, and you constantly feel like there's something that shouldn't be happening, going on, but just out of the corner of your eye where you can't see it. You feel like you can't really trust anyone. You feel like if you were these characters, what would you even do to fix things, because everything's so uncertain and just wrong. It's like looking at a really beautiful photo and then seeing that there's something sort of off or rotten in the corner of the photo that doesn't fit but you can't get rid of. That's what it feels like reading this book. So I really enjoyed the first half of this novel. I thought the second half wasn't as strong. My reasons for that are, in the first half of the novel you're getting to know Alice and Lucy. They're really interesting characters, very different characters, and I really enjoyed getting in both of their heads and trying to decide if I could trust either of them, and trying to decide why they were untrustworthy as well. That was really interesting. I thought the memories were the strongest bits of the novel. So both the girls met at Bennington College in Vermont, and they were roommates, and a lot of the book, especially the first half, is memories of their relationship building up to the incident. And I thought those memories were the best bits of the novel. I thought they were really strong. There's a particular scene when they first meet where they go into an abandoned mansion. It really reminded me of The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. It just felt really eerie, and I felt really unsettled by it. Then I felt that when you find out what the incident is, from that moment on, it's not as strong because it loses some of the tension. And also I felt from that moment on it became more, not predictable because I wasn't really sure where it was going to go, but less surprising, I guess. It becomes more typical of a book of this nature. So I really enjoyed this. I think it's a really strong novel. As I said, for a first novel, I'll definitely read whatever she brings out in the future, and I thought it was a really fun, enjoyable page turner. So that is Tangerine by Christine Mangan. So the next book I'm going to talk about I absolutely adored. I think this is such a phenomenal book, and I really, really loved it, and that is Red Clocks by Lenny Zimas. Now you've probably heard about this one as well, but briefly, the plot is set in a world that is exactly like our own. The only difference is that in America a new law has passed, which includes several different sort of sub-laws called the Personhood Amendment Act. And this law means that abortions are now illegal. Anyone who performs an abortion will be done for murder. It also means that if a woman miscarries, she has to pay for a funeral, and it also means that in vitro fertilisation is banned because you haven't asked the embryo for the right for it to be relocated. And during the course of this novel we also know that a new law is going to be passed that means that single parent families cannot legally adopt. So we see a world that is exactly like our own, but with those laws in place in America, and we're following 4 different women in America, and this is again an alternating perspective novel, so we just take it in turns to go through these 4 characters' viewpoints. I think this is brilliant. A really, really strong novel. Now I can see why this novel won't be for everyone. I think this is for certain types of readers because it has a very specific writing style. I loved the writing style. I thought it was one of the merits of the book, but some people reading the reviews just didn't enjoy it, and I get that. So I'll explain the way the characters are split, and then I'll go into the writing style a bit more. So the 4 characters we have are known by their roles in society rather than their names. So we have the biographer, and the biographer is a teacher by profession, but also she's writing a biography of a female Icelandic explorer. She's completely fictionalised, which I didn't realise, but every now and again we get inserts of the draft of this biography. So we have the biographer's story mainly, and she is trying to conceive and is really worried because she is struggling. She's in her early 40s and she is a single parent, and so, you know, if this new law passes, if she can't conceive naturally, then she also can't adopt, and she's terrified because she really wants a child. So that's her perspective. Another perspective is the mender. The mender is a local herbal woman. She lives very separately from society, and she's looked at as a bit of a mad woman really, and is treated almost like a modern day witch in that some people go to her secretly and pay her in goods, and the rest of the community shun her, and a lot of women go to her hoping that she can help them secretly abort. And the third character is the wife. The wife is obviously married and she has 2 young children, and she's really struggling with her marriage. She's desperately unhappy. She adores her children, but she has moments of resentment, massive resentment for sort of losing herself, for never having a minute to herself, and wondering who she could have been without her husband and without her children. And then the last character is the daughter, and the daughter is around 15 or 16 years old, and she falls pregnant. A boy she slept with at school a few times, she falls pregnant, and she doesn't want a child, and she's terrified about what to do next given the laws the country is currently under. Now, these characters are all linked, they all live in the same community, and as you get into the novel you realise how they're all linked and how their paths all cross. So one of the criticisms I've heard of this novel is that people felt like these characters were caricatures rather than individuals. People felt that they were literally the mender, the biographer, the wife, the daughter. I entirely disagree. I think the choice was made to not make the chapters their names, not as a gimmick, because you do find out these characters' names through other people's perspectives. I felt it was more because these women are individuals and their struggles are struggles of lots of women out there, and so in one sense it was done to allow these struggles to say this isn't just happening to this one woman, these laws will affect all these people. But secondly, I felt that these women and all people are only truly known to themselves, and in your own head you don't think of yourself as your name. I don't think of myself as Mercedes, I just think of myself as, I don't think of myself, you know, you don't. And so you only know their names through other perspectives, which makes sense because my name is only ever spoken because other people need to address me, you know? It's like when someone says my full name to me with my surname, it sounds so foreign and alien to me because I don't think of myself as my full name. So I think that was a really smart move, and I felt I deeply knew these characters. I felt their struggles were so deeply and genuinely felt. And all these perspectives I couldn't always, you know, I haven't lived through these lives, but I felt the anguish, you know, the wife's perspective I felt was so strong and visceral, the way she felt about the life she was living, and the contempt she felt for her husband, and the love but yet struggle she felt with her children. I thought it was perfectly done. So a second criticism I've heard is that the writing style is quite choppy, and just quite odd. And I agree, it is, but I love the book more for that. I usually read books that are very descriptive, very lyrical, and this isn't necessarily that. Particularly in the Mendes chapter, so she's the local herbal woman, she thinks differently, the way she talks is different, and therefore the way she thinks and writes in the story, or is written in the story, is very different. And to begin with, it is quite jarring. When I read the first 2 pages of this book, I was like, what the hell is going on here? And you sort of have to get in the groove of the writing style. And one other thing I want to mention before I go and stop rambling about this book is something I thought was handled perfectly, which really set me on edge and made me really think even more about where we're going as a society, is the way people had handled these changing laws. People made comments throughout this novel, people who otherwise felt like perfectly decent characters, about it not really being a big deal. You know, it doesn't really affect me that badly. Oh, it's not that big a thing. And there's one character, there's one moment in this book where the biographer is trying for a baby, and she's at a clinic waiting for her results, and she makes a comment to another woman in the waiting room about how, you know, it's really urgent that it works because of these changing laws, and the other woman's just like, what? Because they've sort of gone by unawares. And that's so typical when you think about it. You know, you go into this book thinking, oh my god, this is going to be a massive change, this is going to be like reading a dystopian novel, and it isn't at all in any way. It doesn't feel dystopian. It feels like it could happen in the next 2 years, and people would just go, oh, that passed me by, that law didn't affect me, so I didn't really pay attention to the news when that was happening. Or, oh, but you know, I sort of get why that one happened. That one's a little bit too far, but like the other ones make sense, so we'll just go along with it. That was sickening to read, but yet so true of loads of things that have happened and are happening. So yeah, I think this is an amazing novel. I don't think it's for everyone, but I think if you read a few pages of this and you get into the writing style, I would urge you to give it a go. And I'm really happy because, let me show you, I have wanted to read this author's first novel, The Listeners, since it came out quite a few years ago and never got round to it, and it's just been sitting on my shelves, and so now I've finished this one and can just go straight on to this one, which I'm planning to do in the next couple of weeks because I just want to read all of her back catalogue. She has a short story collection as well called Farewell Navigator, so I need to get my hands on that, so I'm thinking she could be a new favourite author, but we shall see. So those are the 4 novels I wanted to talk about today. Let me know if you've read any of them and do feel free to give me recommendations. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these books, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!